everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this panel on climate change mitigation. And I think the first thing that would strike you is that I don't look like Paul Darcy. But this morning's is the only ocean-related panel in the whole two-day conference. And so I do believe that it's a special one. And we have the honor of three very important Pacific Islanders who are at the forefront of doing research, asking the serious questions about oceans and its importance to us in the region. We all know what and how important the Pacific Ocean is. It's the largest ocean in the world, but also it represents for us a huge opportunity. And we know that many times we've often been seen as small and dependent countries, but I like to believe that we are actually large oceanic states. And really the challenge for us and the opportunity is for us to be able to see ourselves in that perspective and shape our development narrative to fit in with the large ocean space that we actually live in. And if I can just share a little bit as a matter of introduction on the work that some of us did to shape and reshape the Pacific Island countries, particularly in the tuna field and tuna sphere, and the development of the vessel day scheme and the work that the parties to the Nauru Agreement did has helped, at least in my own view, inform ourselves about the huge opportunity of what can actually be done. And as we consider climate change, I'd like us to reflect a lot more on the issue of climate change. And discussion I had with Neroni Slade in Suva in June this year was that we both lamented the fact that we seem to see ourselves rather as victims of climate change than to see the huge opportunity that actually lie ahead of us to be able to shape and reshape the conversations around climate impact and resilience. I think we're very lucky this morning that we have three of our scholars here, and up-and-coming scholars and regional servants and national servants, to be able to grace us this morning with their views on how we can navigate our ocean priorities and looking at regional approaches to ocean governance, looking at some of the innovative tools that we're using now to manage our reef fisheries, very important for our communities. And of course, tourism is absolutely critical. And I'd like to just, if I can find where they are in this booklet, introduce the speakers. I had to put the pages, but my sincere apologies. A bit of navigation myself here. The page. Amelia Fautusia is a candidate here at the Department of Pacific Affairs, and if I'm not mistaken, Amelia, you've been here a couple of years now, or there was a conversation I remember coming down here and meeting you at the coffee at the Department of Pacific Affairs. But Amelia comes, she's a PhD candidate in the DPA at ANU. But before that, she undertook her postgraduate studies here also at ANU and has been quite involved and engaged in studies relating to the socioeconomic implications of blue economy and the concept
Recording stop. Recording in progress.
The concept of, thank you very much, the concept of coastal tourism in Tonga, which is very important. But she's also had a diplomatic career as well. And I think she's made the right decision to become not an academic, but I hope you do become one for the Pacific, because I am absolutely sure, Amelia, that the work that you're going to be doing and is important for the Pacific. She's also joined by Marilyn Moira, who is actually quite nervous and said to me that she's not an academic and therefore she feels really intimidated. But I did assure Moira that the audience knows nothing about what you know, so don't worry about and don't feel intimidated. But she's a regional servant who is working in the Office of the Pacific with our good friend, Dr. Philemon Manoni, who just had a knee reconstruction operation a few weeks ago. But she is currently the Ocean Engagement Lead at the Office of Pacific Ocean Commissioner, located in Suva. And I understand maybe soon to go up north to Palau. But before that, she was a senior government officer in foreign affairs, and also, like me, ended up as Deputy Secretary for the Ministry, except not Foreign Affairs, but of Finance, and also Foreign Affairs. So we do share a common pathway. She's a national of Tuvalu, and she will be speaking to us on some of the regional dimensions. And finally, we've got Marguerite, who's from French Polynesia, and just talking to her now, this is actually her first time to come to ANU and to Canberra. So a cold welcome to you. Iorana. She's doing her doctoral research and focusing on building tools and identifying solutions to better management. In my conversation with her yesterday, I was also happy to learn that she's worked very closely with Professor Ray Hilburn of the University of Washington, who is someone that I greatly admire and respect in terms of his understanding and arguments of his philosophy on fisheries management. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Moira, please welcome Talofa Lava. Let's welcome, give her a welcome, warm welcome. Thank you.
Talofa, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think Dr. Transform hit it on the nail for me this morning. I am nervous. I am not an academic, but it is so good to be back here in Canberra. I did my master's in national security policy down the road in Crowford. So as soon as we arrived and I got to walk this pathway, I recall how stressed I was because of the amount of work that I had to do while juggling other matters, including family. So it is a blessing to be with you all here. And thank you for this opportunity. I'd also like to acknowledge Mr. Paul Darcy, who has put together this panel, and his recognition to bring someone from the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, especially the Office of the Pacific Oceans Commissioner, to share with you all some of these regional approaches that we have around oceans. Talking about the state of the Pacific is not complete until you talk about the ocean. And so I thank him again and for this opportunity. So to start off, trying to realize how to do this, but I think, yes, so that is my topic this morning, navigating our ocean priorities and the regional approach to ocean governance. So in terms of the Pacific and climate change, we know that sea surface temperature has shown us through a number of reports that the ocean has taken up to about 90% of the excess heat in the climate system. making climate change irreversible for us in the Pacific because we are large ocean states. We know that ocean warming contributes about 40% of the observed global mean sea level rise through this thermal expansion of water. But I think the most important thing here for us to note is, based on the recent WMO report, is this expansion and this warming has hit the Pacific more, actually 4 times more, than other ocean bodies. So for us, this is drastic. So at the Pacific Island Forum leaders, and since 1971, we've had many discussions around decolonization, shipping, many priorities for that matter. But until very recent years, we have had discussions around the ocean. And the reason being is because I think leaders are beginning to understand that ocean and climate are cross-cutting issues. And in order for you to solve any other of our regional priorities, you must address the ocean. So in terms of the work that we've done, Dr. Transform had made reference to Mr. Neroni Slade, and he was the first Pacific Ocean Commissioner. In 2010, a regional policy on oceans was developed called the Framework for the Pacific Oceanscape. And based on this framework, the office, or more, the Pacific Ocean Commissioner role was established. Now, from 2011 till 2023, this role was held by the Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forum. And after the possible withdrawal by Micronesia and the discussions around the Suva Agreement, we have seen that there is now a standalone Pacific Ocean Commissioner and an office to support him with his role as the Chief Advisor on Oceans to our forum leaders, both regionally and internationally, and also to play a coordinating and advocacy role. And the reason I bring this up is because in recent times, our leaders have realized that the ocean space is contested. Many, many people, many, many players have come to the Pacific, and they have come with their interests. Sometimes these players work through regional organizations. Other times they work through the CROP, which is made up of the 9 Council of Regional organizations in the Pacific, including SPREP, SPC, USP, and of course the PIFs. But the danger is, most of these times, there is direct engagement between these partners and our countries. And we all know that most of our countries don't have Pacific divisions like DFAT, made up of 100 or 200 people. I've worked at the Pacific Division at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tuvalu, and there was only 3 of us. And imagine juggling the same work that 200 other people would do at DFAT's Pacific Division. That's the Pacific for you. So to follow on with this forum leaders' mandate towards OPOC, we have seen the establishment of the Blue Pacific Strategy. Now, this is a strategy put together as a culmination of 7 thematic areas. One in particular looks at oceans and environment. Another one looks at climate change. And this is like a roadmap looking towards 2050. Am I supposed to press something for it to go next? Okay, no. I can do this. Yeah. maybe that's a sign I shouldn't say anymore. Oh, there we go. So, thank you. So, in terms of the existing regional ocean frameworks, this is the plethora of what we have at the moment. And these are the thematic areas within these frameworks, looking at conservation, waste pollution and management, governance, resource management. The first thing that comes to mind is, how do we get all our countries to work on these? We have development partners who come with their agendas. And then we have regional organizations that try to put together all the mandates of our leaders and deliver them to the 18 countries, or should I say the 22 states and territories within the Pacific. It's an arduous task, I should say. Okay. So in terms of ocean governance, we have the framework for the Pacific Oceanscape. Since 2010, and I know that in terms of regional ocean policy, this is a bit outdated, and the Office of the Pacific Oceans Commissioner is looking to review this policy. And the reason being is we've realized that there are emerging issues, there are many opportunities and challenges that we require such a policy to be fit for purpose. There are mandates from OPOC. So one was in New Zealand in 2011, where we saw the appointment of Mr. Neroni Slade as the first Pacific Oceans Commissioner. Then as time went on, we saw that there was also discussions around including oceans as part of the Rio Plus 20 agenda and the recognition of the PIF-SG in the global fora. I bring your attention to Palau's mandate in 2014, and this is why I wanted to have this discussion with you this morning. And this was the call on OPOC with support through the Pacific Ocean Alliance. This is a mechanism within the regional ocean policy that gives an opportunity to stakeholders such as academics, NGOs, private organizations, to have their voice heard, channeled through the Pacific Oceans Commissioner to our leaders. Later in Fiji, yes, like I mentioned, in 2023, we saw Dr. Philemon being appointed. And based on his appointment, he now leads on all coordination, all advocacy issues around oceans. And we know this is a very difficult task. But through the help of our CROP, through collaborative efforts that we have with our regional partners, including philanthropy and research organizations, this can be made possible. Now, in terms of the challenges and opportunities, we know that a warming Pacific will directly alter the storm tracks. I mean, how many of you have been in Suva, or Nandi for that matter, between November and April? You would have noticed that there's so many cyclones. Luckily for us in Tuvalu, we make the cyclones. But then poor countries like Vanuatu gets to, feel the brunt of it. Now we know that with a warming Pacific Ocean, there will be alterations to storm tracks. There are other things like ocean stratification and how this might lead to weakening our ocean currents. We know that our tuna are migratory species. So what would this mean for the economic development of our countries? Just like Dr. Transform talked about the PNA. There's also other challenges around sustainable livelihoods. at the UN, we have an SDG that looks after life underwater. But we know the SDGs, right? We know what's happening with multilateralism. And as much as we've seen contributions and progress in the recent SIDS and also the MVI that looks at a multifaceted vulnerability index that should help and assist with the special circumstances of SIDS, where does that leave us? And the fourth point is, of course, that this space is contested by the diverse interests and positions that are currently underplay in the Pacific. Now, in terms of the opportunities that we have, I feel that having a coherent, more collaborative stakeholder engagement protocol for the Pacific will allow us to address our ocean priorities better than how we have been doing in the last 10 years. And just like the Pacific, just like each country, we cannot address these issues on our own. We need to work as a region. But at the same time, we understand that every country comes with their sovereign interests. Another opportunity would be, like I mentioned earlier, the utilization of the Pacific Ocean Alliance. We need to have academia provide the information and the resource that will drive the policy, because this policy will help our leaders create the mandates that will benefit our communities. And that's the reason why I look to the people in this room. In terms of our current institutional arrangements, I thought I'd speak a bit about this. OPOC, the Office of the Pacific Oceans Commissioner, is not a standalone organization. We work within the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat. As you can see, we have SPTO, SPC, SPREP, PIPS, FFA, USB. Some of these organizations have mandates around the oceans, be it fish, be it marine plastics pollution, be it science, be it tourism, like one of my colleagues will speak about today. But at the end of the day, it is important that we understand, for us at OPOC, we bring together the discussions, the work programs that each country puts together and gives to our regional organizations. And we do this so that we can help our countries. Currently, we have colleagues who are in the Solomon Islands. And our colleagues had to go, correct me if I'm wrong, Doctor, is it Tulangi? They had to go by a boat ride for this Ocean 12 ministerial meeting. And before this, we had BBNJ national workshops, both regionally in Suva, and we had them in the Solomon Islands, and we will be having them in places like PNG, in Tuvalu, in Tonga, before the end of the year. So the mandate that OPOC has is to carry out and assist countries with the ratification process towards the BBNJ Treaty. Next. Now, in terms of the thematic areas, in partnership with the crop, I mentioned the BBNJ ratification, marine pollution. This is another upcoming and serious issue that we are facing in our oceans, especially with fish ending up with so much microplastics in their guts. The Plastics Treaty negotiations, or INC, is supposed to complete by the end of December. The deep sea minerals, Talanoa. We've had a couple of leaders speak about this in the last 1 or 2 weeks. And OPOC has been facilitating the discussions around this. We know about ocean-based economies. I was at the ISA negotiations earlier this year. And if there's one thing that a lot of people told me when I said I was from the Pacific, they said other regions are working together, but not the Pacific. There's many diverse views. There's maritime boundary issues. There's sea level rise. If most of you are not aware, please look up the latest communique by our Pacific Island Forum leaders and what they say about sea level rise, looking towards UNGA. There's the ocean climate nexus that we are talking about. Oceans is not a standing item at the UNFCCC negotiations. We would like to see this changed. So we're looking towards COP30 and of course COP31, our COP, to see this change for the betterment of our people. There's ocean literacy through UNICEF. There's global account on oceans and observation. There's a lot about integrated ocean management systems that I think my colleague will speak about this morning. And of course, the ocean geopolitics. So to conclude, I'd like to say, you know, growing up, I spent a couple of years of my life in places like Vaitupu in Tuvalu and Kio Island in Fiji. And I have grandparents who would tell me that for every animal that is present on land, there is a similar animal in the sea. Now, I don't know if that's true. We don't have the facts to prove that. But that is because 95% of our ocean remains unknown and unexplored. People actually have more data and more information about space rather than the ocean. So it's so important that we work together. I think the last thing I'd like to say before I leave is I believe that knowledge shared is knowledge doubled. Share your information, work with us, and we'll help get your information out there to build the knowledge base of our communities, because at the end of the day, they are the ones at the forefront. Ironically, I find that there is a geopolitics panel that is happening right now on the other end. But this is the state of the Pacific, where we would like our interests and our priorities to be centered around oceans and climate. I leave that there. I thank you.
It's in my presentation. Yeah. No. Where is it? I don't know.
That one?
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
Nice. Thank you.
Use the clicker.
That should work.
Hope
Thank
so.
you. Yeah. Yorana Tato. First, I acknowledge the land and the owner of the land on which we stand, past, present, and emerging. And I also want to thank Dr. Paul Darcy for putting this panel together, all Pacific Islanders, which is very nice to have. And also thanks to all the organizer of this conference. And thank you, Transform, for sharing our panel. So today I'll be sharing with you some of the work I've been involved with back home in Tahiti and Moorea on coral reef fisheries. Just a little context first. So coral reef ecosystem provide a lot of ecosystem services to humankind, and in particular to Pacific Islanders, as my colleague had said, as ocean is just all around us. They are culturally, socially, and economically important as they provide coastal protection. They are a source of food and income for a lot of households and are integral part of our culture and of us, really. However, these coral reefs are suffering from consequences of global warming, with an increase in the frequency of bleaching events and the degradation of habitat. Global warming do not just affect adult coral colonies that we can see, but all the development stage. As you can see on the pictures right there, on the first one, we have very healthy coral eggs, and when we bring up the temperature to about 31, they all disformed. So the consequences of climate change are also on other organisms, not just coral reef, but on fish, for example, where the rising temperature would reduce species diversity and drive community changes. Species are also expected to change their distribution throughout the planet and become less abundant. As with coral, changes in temperature will also disrupt the entire life cycles of these organisms that we rely on. The consequences of climate change are compounded with more local anthropogenic pressures, such as population growth, coastal development, runoff of pollutant and nutrients into the lagoon, as well as overfishing. So the question then arises, what social ecological approaches can we adopt to mitigate the effects of climate change on coral reef ecosystems and fisheries, rather than acting just on the causes of climate change? So the major challenges that we face, especially in French Polynesia, and I guess we're all sharing that in the Pacific, is that we're faced with a threatened and already degraded ecosystem, a growing population, and an economy that is highly dependent on the outside. For example, in Tahiti, we import pretty much everything. We need to actually start working on preserving our environment, ensuring food security for all the people that live there, and also reduce our carbon footprint. These major changes and the solution for these major changes, the solution seems to be to have more sustainable and more productive ecosystem. But how do we actually build this? Lately, we have seen rising interest in local ecological knowledge and traditional practices regarding resource management. And in fact, our ancestors used to have sustainable exploitation system and acquire that knowledge through observation and a deep understanding of the local ecological dynamics. But in the face of rapid and brutal change, it seems like local ecological knowledge cannot address it all. And we need to have hybrid approaches that combine local ecological knowledge, scientific knowledge, and innovative technologies. And so now, if my thing wants to work, sorry. One of the solutions that will enable coral reef ecosystem to be more productive will be to manage resources with local stakeholders. And here I'll present the example of the Tautira rahui. So first, a rahui is a pre-European contact institution in which the chief of the village will set a temporary ban on a resource or on an area. And lately, we have been trying to reuse this ancestral practice to address challenges that we're facing nowadays. And Tautira here is located, can I point? Maybe not. Is located on the Tahiti Peninsula. So it's on the main island of French Polynesia, so urbanized. But this this little village the fishing is very important to them. It's so important that, for example, the Mass, because everyone is Catholic there pretty much, the Mass is held on the Mondays so that the fishers can actually go to the main market in Papeete to sell their fish on Sundays. But they have seen that the fish abundance and size were declining over the years. And so they decided to put an innovative rahui in place in July 2018. And the rahui, as you can see here on the map, is divided in 3 parts. The central part is a no-take marine reserve, and both on the sides were destined to be open alternatively after reflection, after discussion. And so they closed it from July 2018 all the way to March 2025. And they also created, a local committee management with people from different groups from the village. So it will be, of course, fishers, with fisherwomen as well. And we have education included, agriculture, and so on, and churches, because it's very important over there as well. So as scientists, we put together a monitoring program for this special rahui to see how the fish abundance and size would evolve over time inside and outside the rahui. And as we can see on the top image there, we found that there was more and bigger fish inside of the tree part of the rahui compared to outside. And we engaged discussion with the local community to see how they wanted to open that rahui, because it was coming to an end in 2023. And after a lot of discussion, what was decided was to open both sides. So they changed the plan throughout time. So they opened zone 1 and 2, both sides, for 2 mornings from 8 a.m. to midday. And they only allowed spearfishing and line fishing for that time. And they also wanted to put, size limits in place, but knowing that we don't have local information on size at maturity of the commercial species, we looked at the literature and so defined some size limits based on the literature. So the opening occurred in March 2023. And the management committee also wanted to know how much fish was gonna come out from the rahui. And as scientists, we were very interested in that information as well. So we put together another protocol to monitor the opening of the rahui by using a platform SPC, the Pacific community provided. And so it was pretty simple. So we were asking the fishermen to come back to land when they finish their fishing trip, and we will place their fish on the mat as it's shown up there. We took a picture of the different mats and uploaded that to the platform. And the platform from SPC is actually using artificial intelligence to locate each fish, estimate the size, and then estimate the species as well. And from that protocol, we were able to estimate that they fished about 1 ton of fish over the 8 hours of fishing, which is pretty good for Tahiti. Because we monitored another rahui opening in February this year, in which they only fished 370 kilos in the same amount of time, and they had more fisher as well at that opening. So that shows that the rahui from Tautira was quite efficient, for that matter at least. Now the Tautira rahui is closed again to fishing, and we're trying to keep our monitoring effort to support this community in their management. But then, when we digged into our results, we identify, and also throughout all the discussion we have with local fishers, we identify different issues, and I'll present 3 of them today to you. The first one is that we saw a mismatch between what was coming out of the water. So like the top graph here shows the different family of fish that were fished. And you can see the most fished species was all the soldier fish, where in our fish count, which is the second image here, they only represent 2% of what we see in our fish count. And so the question is, how can we actually effectively monitor a rahui when we don't actually see the fish that the fisher are catching? And another example that illustrates that is that on the island of Moorea, which is the neighbor island from Tahiti, we set up 8 marine protected areas around the island. And those marine protected areas were monitored by people from my lab, actually, and they were saying that they were not efficient because they were not seeing any difference in the fish count, in the biomass throughout the years. And they have been counting fish since 1998. But then when you talk to the fishermen, they are actually seeing some change in their fishing activities. So to address that issue, we partner with local fishers and local NGO to develop a new fish count method that would actually make sense for fishers, managers, and also scientists. And we see this method as incorporating fishers' knowledge on fish behavior, migration patterns, and all of that knowledge that they hold. We see that method also addressing fishery objectives rather than just ecological ones. Like a lot of ecologists like to count everything, or, we love data, but then trying to collect actual data that makes sense for the people. And we see also that method getting a better understanding of and considering better all the targeted species. And that project is underway, so I don't have any results right now, but hopefully soon. Another issue that we encountered was about size limits. Remember how during the opening we set size limits based on the literature? Well, we proposed the size based on that and then discussed them with the local community. For the i'ihi, we call them, so the soldier fish there, we suggested 18 centimeters as a size limit based on the literature, and all the fishers are like, we're never gonna get any i'ihi for that opening if the size limit is that high. And so through a lot of discussion, the size limit was pulled down to 15 centimeters. And as you can see on the top graph, actually, the fishermen and the fishers had pulled a lot of fish over 18 centimeters. And they were quite surprised about it because they usually don't see that big of fish outside of the rahui. And for the second species that I'm giving you the example for, the umetare, we call it, it's a unicorn fish, sorry. We suggested a 25 centimeter size limit as well. And we had the same reaction, fishermen saying, no, we're never gonna get that big fish. But the manager present, everyone was like, the discussion were going on, and finally we set at 25 centimeter, trying to follow what the scientists were saying, but in fact, they didn't actually get that many big fish from the opening. So what we can see is that what we find in the literature is useful, but not always adapted, and local information is better. Also knowing that size limits are a management measure that a lot of stakeholders are requesting, we put another research project together to better estimate the life history parameters of the targeted species, including size at maturity as well, to define those size limits locally. However, as you may all know, we are targeting so many different species in the Pacific. I think in Tahiti is like more than 100 species that are targeted, and we couldn't possibly sample all of those species. So the first step of that project was to prioritize species for research and management. And so we developed a little framework to do so, a framework that will actually take into account fisheries prioritization through the process, because usually what is usually done is to have scientists think about it, managers think about it, and little space is left for fisheries. So we try to do that, and through that process, we have defined 5 species or group of species to concentrate the effort on, and those are the species I'm focusing my PhD work on, which is in progress. And so again, I don't have any results, but that was the approach behind it. And lastly, the last issue I wanted to share with you that we identify with the fishermen is about coral and algae competition. So local fishers have witnessed a big increase in algal cover throughout the lagoons of Tahiti and Moorea. And this can be due to the removal of herbivorous fish through fishing, but also, and we usually forget about that, all the enrichment in nutrients coming from terrestrial runoff. And to have a more productive system and help corals to come back, fishers suggested to remove algae in certain area of the lagoon. So with the same partner, we are trying to develop a new methodology to count fish. We also conducted algal removal campaign led with the fishers, and we are monitoring how the algae and the fish community are reacting to it, and also investigating how this could offer an alternative activity for the fishers. And so here you have a lot of pictures of the campaign that we've done. And to conclude, I'm deeply convinced that we can actually find solutions to mitigate climate change. One of the first steps will be, I think, to listen to each other. In my case, scientists need to listen to the local communities who hold so much knowledge and put science at the service of these communities rather than the opposite. But that doesn't answer the question about environmental justice, which is very important, and also economic development that my colleague will talk about right now. Thank you.
This is the clicker.
You can see your notes there, and it's on the main screen.
All right. All right, malolele, everyone. Thank you very much to both my fellow panelists for starting us off really nicely. And I think that the aspect of community engagement, which is what I'm covering in support of the flow of this panel in relation to ocean-based tourism, is one that is really important, particularly in light of the fact that tourism is a significant economic sector of ocean-based economies in the Pacific. Okay, so this is just a brief outline. I just will be covering 3 case studies which are a part of my ongoing research, really just unpacking some thoughts in relation to my time in these 3 locations, and how things are done in relation to encouraging and strengthening community-based approaches in tourism that not only help conserve nature and the ocean, but also economically empower communities throughout the Pacific, but most specifically in relation to these 3 case studies. Before I go into these 3 case studies, though, I'd like to mention that there are obviously many, many case studies in the Pacific, but these are 3 that I've strategically chosen for the basis that these 3 countries really do benefit from ocean-based tourism that largely depends on the ocean and nature in these 3 countries. Now, just to start off with as an intro, by way of an introduction on a more global stage, coastal and marine tourism constitutes about 50% of global tourism. And there are many, many findings out there in relation to research on the sector that suggest that responsible and sustainable tourism can stimulate high-quality economic growth that provides opportunities for local communities and the environment to benefit. Before I go any further into covering these 3 case studies, I just wanted to highlight something that is specific to the way in which tourism is being implemented or operationalized in a Pacific context. They really do depend on 3 building blocks shown there on the screen, which I think together, community, environment, and culture, when implemented together in the Pacific, makes tourism different from other regions of the world. And so these 3 case studies, before going any further, are highly characterized by community-based engagement, but also issues in relation to sovereignty that some of these contexts have in relation to the community either having a very strong hand in operationalizing tourism or expatriates or foreign interests being present in these locations that sometimes hamper community-based involvement and engagement in tourism. I wanted to show by this map something that is a big part of the tourism sector in all 3 locations, which are the humpback whales that we receive in Tonga. Almost every year, they come and spend almost 4 to 5 months every year giving birth, breeding their young, and then migrating back. This is part of their annual cycle of life, and so for a few months of the year, they spend feeding in the South Antarctic and then migrate up through New Zealand, Fiji, and then into tropical waters, which include Tongan waters, for 4 to 5 months of the year. And so that constitutes a very lucrative whale-watching sector in Tonga as well as New Zealand. And so this second map here also shows that, but in relation to what looks more of like a corridor or a migration pathway for these whales. These are the amazing pictures that tourists normally capture and is sort of the draw card for them coming in. Amazing pictures, amazing experience, but as I'll mention later, there are some issues in relation to sovereignty, but also in relation to overcrowding if there are too many boats on the water, as well as in relation to disturbance of practices for these whales that spend quite a significant amount of time in Tongan waters, in Pacific waters. Okay, so this is the first case study in Tonga, my home country, Tonga, particularly the outer islands of Vava'u that have quite an advanced whale-watching sector, very seasonal in that this sector only exists for 5 months of the year, and so therefore tourism is seasonal in that respect, but also diversifying tourism activities is also an important part of tourism in this location. One thing that would really stand out in the Vava'u context is this large expatriate community, the existence of expatriates who in fact started whale watching back in the 90s and who dominate the whale watching sector in terms of the number of operators in existence. And so there's a lot of sovereignty issues in relation to local communities wanting to enter the market, but usually finding themselves in a situation where they're constrained financially and investment-wise to be able to buy a boat, for example, or even maintain that and enter the market. There is also, I think, a lot of mention, especially in the interviews I've conducted with a lot of people on the ground in Vava'u in relation to people deliberately not obeying the rules. And that is a huge problem in relation to conservation efforts, but also risking the long-term existence, really, of this sector in Vava'u. And so on top of having over 20 operators, which is a problem in itself, an overcrowding problem. Expatriates dominate, and then on top of that, this lack of enforcement or willingness to obey the rules is also, I think, a downside. So yes, that's the Vava'u context. I just wanted to show by this slide the fact that the activity itself, because it's quite a unique one, and because Tonga is one, I think, of only 3 countries in the world that allow swimming with the whales rather than just whale watching from the boat itself. The activity itself is very lucrative in that for a guest per day, a person pays over 500 pa'anga. And because most of the tourists that we receive are foreigners who are either whale lovers or who just want to tick this off their bucket list, they realize the reality that we're not in control of finding a whale that day. So they often pay for 7 to 8 days in order to get the perfect experience or the perfect picture that they're looking for, which again, I think is another indication of just how lucrative this sector is locally and where this money, I guess, is flowing, given the large presence of expatriates in Vava'u. So these are just some of the problems that I've just mentioned in relation to the overcrowding, but also the safety and security of tourists and the poor enforcement of regulations. Oh. Sorry, I think this is freezing for a bit. Help. Thanks.
What have you done to it? Just
I didn't do anything, I promise.
What slide are you on? You're on slide 10. Let me just jump out of this and we'll see what we're going to do. Okay, let's try that again.
Okay.
Back to slide 10.
All right. So into the second case study, Kaikoura, New Zealand, same whales we're talking about in Tonga passing through, but also they've got resident sperm whales. And so it's less of a seasonal sector in the Kaikoura context. Despite the fact that the same whales pass by, very, very different way of doing things, which I was quite sort of intrigued about. Culture is very much embedded in the way that they do things, particularly in relation to the fact that Maoris, they revere whales and they see them as guardians, and therefore I think they go more out of their way to protect and to manage license numbers. And in fact, when we look at Kaikoura, we've got only 2 licenses. That's 2 compared to 26 in Tonga. And this whale watching company is actually a community-based Maori Indigenous owned company, family owned. And therefore, in contrast to Tonga, more Indigenous oriented way of doing things and perspective. And so very much centered on culture and on family, but also in terms of the cultural significance of the activity, in giving tourists a chance to see how significant whales are in the Maori culture. In addition to the fact that this is locally owned, the company is also set up as a community trust. And so the profits or the money involved doesn't go into one person's pocket. This is all being channeled, all the profits. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar company right now, 30 years into operation, being channeled into a community trust that is then sort of used as a platform to channel those resources financially into health, education, and priorities of the Maori community present in Kaikoura. And so I think in general, in contrast to Tonga, there's just, I think, been a lot of forethought put into not only going out of their way to survive as a business since early days, 30 years ago, but also ensuring that community engagement is very much a strong feature of the way they do things, and that profits and the benefits do flow back into the community in support of health, education, conservation, and other activities, including research on whales to understand their behaviors more. So in general, Kaikoura really does feature an Indigenous development sort of model and setting in support of sustainable ocean-based tourism that has culture and community engagement at the core. Dolphins is also a part of their tourism sector, not just watching, but also swimming, which I think is quite similar to the Tonga context, but in relation to whales, of course. And the fact that license numbers also reflect the fact that they've really tried to manage, there's only 1 license for dolphin watching and swimming. And so that in itself, I think, is also a really big contrast to Tonga, reflecting the degree to which impacts on dolphins and the ocean is being managed. Now, Fiji is quite an advanced case nationally because they are home to some of the best ecotourism in the world. But this here, Laluvia Island Resort, I'm sure a number of us have probably visited, is 15 minutes I think, away from bow landing in Suva, 40 minutes, sorry, not 15. And so I think this island resort is, I think, an exemplary example of community-based tourism in that in conversations with people in the resort, but also the owners who are locals, you really do get the sense that the resort exists not because of the money. It's really in support of empowering the local community to conserve their natural environment through an MPA, which exists right around the island. It's quite a small island. And in doing so, they enforce things like no plastics. There are bores on the island, and so incorporating a very authentically Fijian way and style of living when you're on the island. And so in that way, I think really does help in terms of climate change mitigation through MPAs, but also through coral planting, which is one of the biggest, I think, programs that are available on the island for tourists. Now, these are just, I've covered that really quickly, and we can talk more about it during the Q&A, but these are just some overall reflections in relation to these three really unique contexts on ocean-based tourism. And I think the first thing I'd like to say in reflection is conservation can economically empower communities. There's often, sort of the thought around we can't do this overnight and therefore why do it? But it could be incorporated into tourism businesses like resorts, like whale watching, by doing things like managing license numbers, avoiding the use of single-use plastics, but also managing things like rest times for whales and dolphins when engaging with them, as well as things like MPAs and communities who surround those resorts engaging in enforcing the conditions of those MPAs more broadly. And so I think community-based engagement, when we talk about issues like climate change mitigation in any sector, including tourism, really is, I think, the one key to success. Community engagement, again, reinforcing what my colleagues have said in terms of things like local knowledge, traditional knowledge, incorporating all of that into tourism, but also other ocean-based sectors that ocean-based economies of the Pacific benefit from, will really, I think, lead to the success of initiatives long-term wise. And so I will leave you with that. Malo pito.
Please join me in thanking our presenters once again for those three excellent presentations. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't wish to stand in the way of our questions. I'm sure there's a lot of you who would like to ask questions of our panel. But I'd like to congratulate the three of you for your excellent presentation. I certainly learned a lot, and I think they're very powerful too. So some lessons that we have. Very interested to know about the political economy of the whale watching in Vavau. It's for those of you who haven't been to Vavau, it's one of the most beautiful places in the Pacific. So I would now like to ask if there's anyone who have any questions. Yes, my brother at the back, can you identify yourself? Na singaw tim nembelu. Thank you, True. A bit of projection will always help.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for lovely presentations by the panel. Now, I just like to zoom down or zoom up in terms of taking stock of the carbon in the ocean. I think the world is sort of moving fast in that area of carbon credits. Now, if you come from an ocean-based economy, and those from the land-based economy, and those who basically an environmental-based economy, I think I kind of see it in a. Sorry, I'm a climate mitigation researcher with the Climate Change Institute, by the way. So when we look at the mitigation aspect, we basically want to monetize it in terms of seeing the stock we have in our resources. And when you look at ocean, it is massive. It is a sink, massive reservoir of carbon, and followed by the land, followed by, and then the forest. So out of that, when we conserve the land, or when we conserve the ocean, or when we conserve our forest, there must be an incentive to conserve our resources. And what form of incentive? And tourism is one avenue. But I'd like to see in a dimension of, in the face of climate change, are we able to take stock of the carbon in there? And I think that's will add another dimension to, that we have a beautiful place on planet Earth and people are flocking into the Pacific. But we need to increase our value in terms of the economy. So I'd like the three presenters to enlighten a bit on your perspective.
Thank you. Maybe I'll ask, what do you think, Moira? Maybe you want to give us a start on some of the discussions that we're having in the region on climate financing. And the other, Amelia and Margaret, you want to also contribute, but please, Moira.
So thank you for the question. And I think this is, you've actually highlighted an issue that we are actually facing in terms of climate change, and that's climate financing, right? We have a couple of mechanisms that we are running regionally. We have the Pacific Regional Facility that has just been established to look at the vulnerabilities around climate change and the projects. So all in all, I feel that, for one, I'm not the expert on this, but I can say that there are mechanisms available in the region. We have experts who are working on this. But at the same time, I feel that if this is one issue that we continue to have, and it's around the access of these financial or climate finance arrangements. For small Pacific Island countries, sometimes it takes up to 2 years to put together a proposal. And with very, very small human resource capacities, this can be, of course, a very exhaustive process. We look to you, to experts like you and your organization to help us. Because even at the regional level, I'll speak with the example of the PIF. We have a very small climate resilience team. And we are expected to serve all 18 member countries. So before I hand it over to my colleagues, I think that, yes, we have mechanisms available. We need experts to help us. But at the same time, it's how this reaches our communities that is the bigger question. Yeah.
Just to add on a little bit on the local scale, sorry. I guess as I was finishing my presentation, that question about environmental justice, how all our communities have to face all of these problems where they haven't been the main actors in that climate change. I guess like our government need to do a bit more on getting more justice about that. But then at the local scale, what we are trying to do back in Tahiti at least is to find alternative resources for those fishermen when we set up marine protected area, when we doing all our things, but still trying to think about, because as we were saying with Transform, there's always a trade-off at some point that we need to find, and we don't want our communities to be losing all the time. And maybe my colleague.
Do you want to answer? You don't have to. I think I'll just take there's one question at the front here, and then I'll take, if you don't mind, Sio. Yeah.
Thanks to all the panelists. That was each a very interesting presentation, and I learned a lot, so thank you for sharing. My question is about the ecotourism aspects in Kaikoura. I wanted to ask, so what are the sort of structural things that are in place to protect the Ngāi Tahu permit and prevent other people, I guess, from exercising the same thing in the area. What are the lessons learned through that could be applied in other spaces where that's not happening, like Tonga or elsewhere in Aotearoa? And what are the structural barriers that they might face in getting that same protection?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a really good question, and I think a basis for sort of a lesson learned for contexts like Tonga who are struggling with overcrowding. I think in the Kaikoura context, they're managing the numbers so far over the past 30 years, I think have largely been based on the initiative of the currently existing company to push back on any additional licenses being issued. The Department of Conservation is responsible for issuing licenses and enforcing them. But from what I understand from the conversations I had with people of Kaikoura, is that over time in the past, there has been cases where foreigners have tried to get a license in order to enter the market and operate in Kaikoura. But what has happened is that Department of Conservation has kept a really close relationship with the current operators in Kaikoura. And because of that close relationship, there's always been a really strong pushback from the existing company against any sort of suggestions or thoughts around issuing any additional licenses from the Department of Conservation. I think in the Tonga case, that close relationship doesn't really exist. And I think very highly politically driven. A lot of these expatriates have really close relationships with members of parliament, higher ups in Tonga, where that just gives them that ease of access of being able to obtain a license. And those numbers have increased as a result over time to an unsustainable level. And so I think the challenge is to really talk to each other more, government and the private sector, and to really come together and have a dialogue or just talanoa on priorities that are of interest to both parties, which I'm sure is the health of our oceans and ensuring that these whales are being respected in terms of their practices and their space and this important time of their life cycle annually, being in Tonga. I hope I've answered your question. Thanks.
Maybe if the whales could talk, they'll probably complain. We have a question at the back there, and then I'll take one from George. So there's more hands coming up, but George at the back, and then I'll take yours, and then we've got 10 minutes.
Talofa, Moses here from Victoria University. I'm not a climate change expert at all. I'm a gang researcher, so I'm completely out of left field here. But I just wanted to commend you, all three of you, Moira, Marguerite, and also Amelia, for those presentations. They were fantastic, very clear, very succinct, and pretty sharp, if I must say. I was going to ask the same question that my previous person has already asked, but I'm going a little bit more personal. So all three of you, one is Tahitian, the other one is Tuvaluan, and Red, Amelia, you're a Tongan, right? So, how much of your Pacifica-ness do you draw on when you are faced with tough decisions? When on the one hand, you're accountable to certain things, certain policies, procedures, and processes. But on the other hand, we are talking about the country that you or your parents have grown up in. So how much of a balance do you, all three of you, if you can comment on that real quickly, that you draw on in your Pacifica-ness?
Thank you. It's a good question. Excellent question for us in the
Yeah.
Pacific Islanders.
Yeah, maybe I should start off and say, and I don't want to go to town with this because we know Tuvalu is synonymous when you talk about climate change. As the AR6 report highlighted, it's one of the first countries that might disappear because of sea level rise. Now, for me, I think this question, in a lot of ways, is for me because I work in a regional organization. And when we engage with our partners, and when we talk about where we are from, a lot of times the contexts are either misinterpreted, not understood totally. And so for us in the Pacific, I think that when you are carrying out your roles, it's very important that you think of the most vulnerable person you know. Or you think about the communities that you come from. Or you think of what sort of life you will have if you don't need your Tuvalu passport because there's no state. I think that is as specific as I can be. But apart from that, I think it's also important that you carry your cultural values. You understand the importance of respect. You understand the importance of your family and the social cultures and structures that you represent. Because that is being Pacific. It's not about what you wear, but it's how you carry yourself. And the language you speak. And whether you can dance or whether you're ready to leave your hat as a regional servant working at the PIFs and come and serve the food for the family or the people that come to your house. Because you can be whatever out there, but when you're at home, you're a daughter, you're a grandchild, you're the youngest in the family. And as much as you're educated and you were sent overseas, but in the home, you are this, and you must live up to it. And I think that's the beauty of being from the Pacific.
Well, she said it all. I guess to add on, I think for my part at least, I feel a bit more pressured to be serving my people, because when you go and ask questions, they first have way more questions to ask you, like, why is this, why is that? And you need to like go out of your field and be able to answer, and you accountable. So I feel that compared to all the French or American researchers that work in French Polynesia, way more pressure and have to actually deliver results for the community. So that's the only thing I'll add on to what Moira said.
Okay, I think there's nothing left to be said, but I think in my situation, I definitely draw a lot from being Tongan. I mean, Tongans are much like all other Pacific countries where we see ourselves in relation to our communities. We are obviously not individualistic. You know, we see ourselves in relation to our uncles, our aunts, the family that we come from, and that influences everything that a Tongan does. And I can say that's very much true for myself. I think in the space of academia and research, where I currently operate, there's obviously this big push to use culturally appropriate approaches when you're in the field doing field work. And that in itself cannot be emphasized more importantly today, more than ever before, because communities really are that's where really most of the answers lie. We can't come in with our own solutions without considering context, without considering the community and what they know, what their local knowledge is, and the protocols through which they operate. And so I think going back to that identity has always been something that I've operated on. Thank you.
So I thank you for that. That's an excellent question to ask of our panelists. But I'm just conscious of time, but I think we'll take two questions. Yeah? So one from you, George, and there was a hand up in here. So we'll take it as the last one, if you don't mind. I don't want to stand in between you and your lunch.
Question to the next person, but just to say this, it's very refreshing and inspiring to see the next group of ocean scientists, policymakers, and leaders are all women, standing next to one of the greatest, but also on sharing their panel with another ocean champion, so it's but I do have a longer question, but I think it's better that we celebrate what's in front of us right now. Thank you.
We'll take one more question from the middle here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chair, for giving me opportunity to ask a question. And first of all, thank you so much for your excellent presentation. I have actually two questions. One is more specific on regional framework, and because currently I'm researching on the regional framework on the international migration in relation to the Pacific region. And so what's your comments about the regional framework on the climate mobility related? And what is the most challenge to build up a regional framework to deal with the issues? That's probably a very specific question. Another one is a more general question. I'm a Chinese background working in Australia, and I want to research on the Pacific. Is that even possible for people like me without the regional knowledge or the regional background to research, and how to truly understand the community in the Pacific? And what advice you can give to me? Thank you very much.
Moira? Yeah.
So thank you for the question. So in terms of a regional framework, I think when you're talking about labor mobility, I think the best I can draw from is that last week I was in Tonga, and because I'm Tuvaluan, I attended the entry into force of the Falepili Treaty Union between Tuvalu and Australia. And as we all know, there's been a couple of academics, and there's been papers and information and perspectives out there in the media that talk about how this is a strategic issue and it impedes on sovereignty. But sometimes we fail to see the other aspect, and that is the 280 people who will benefit from this move, and how their livelihoods can actually change, not for them, but also for their children, in terms of education, in terms of accessing better lives, and how they can come back and help their communities. So when we talk about a regional framework on labor mobility, I think it is so important that we understand that there are many dynamics at play. And we should research or understand better the conditions that these people are living and the places that they are going, and what it really means for them to move from very, very isolated places to come to Australia and New Zealand and live in outside their communities. Because we, like Amelia and Marguerite both mentioned, we're very community-based people. And to come and live in new places, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. So I think it's a step in the right direction for us, but I think that there's also more that we can do in ensuring that if people are to move, they move with, with dignity, with good access, and that this all in all contributes back to their families that they're leaving. I think that is also an important aspect. Now, for your second question around what you think, what I think you can do if, as a researcher, and I think Amelia also talked about this and just understanding, the cultural sensitivities. If you want to talk about the Pacific and you want to research the Pacific, come to the communities that you want to learn about. But this is one thing we faced in Tuvalu. In terms of our tourism, we don't have many visitors. We have a lot of researchers. And what happens is our researchers come, they obtain their information, they go and they write their papers, they get them published, and goodbye. So if you want to really have an impact on the communities and you are genuine about what you want to do for the communities and the research that you plan on doing, come, get to know, and create those connections. Tell the stories, but look at ways that you benefit the people that you researched.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask you and invite you all to please join me once again. Before I close, I'd just like to reiterate the words of Salah George to the three of you. Let me just have a message for the three of you. First and foremost, I'm very proud to be able to be your convener in place of Paul. As George said, young Pacific Islanders. I want to leave a message to the three of you, as I encouraged you all yesterday. I knew some of you were really nervous. As a young Pacific Islander your age, I got very good advice from one of the early pioneers of the region who shaped the Pacific, someone called by the name of late Philip Muller, was my boss. And he called me into his office. And in those days, you would see Solomon Island women walk in town, bent over with firewood on their backs. And he said to me, Transform, we must always remember that in everything we do, it is to make these people's lives better. And it was I always remembered that message, and also the other message was that he said to me, always keep your feet on the ground. So to the three of you, I'm standing here really proud as I listen to your presentation today. I am privileged to be able to actually convene, and I wish you all the best. And I would ask that you continue to ensure that in the work that you do, always remember that in the ocean space, it is about the empowerment of our people, and more importantly, using that power to improve the social and economic well-being of our people. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much.